Study Session 9. Emotion. Introduction. Emotion ranges from purely sensory experiences with minimal cognitive or situational content to complex social interaction. Max, 1976. Because of this great scope, definition generalization that applies to all emotions are difficult to obtain. In this study session, therefore, we shall examine the concept, nature, types, dimension, and consequences of emotion. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Define and use correctly the term emotion. 2. Highlight at least 3 types of emotion. 3. Discuss the consequences of emotional arousal. 4. Analyze the various concept theories. And 5. Discuss the implication of emotional theory. Concept and nature of emotion. Emotion is a psychological concept. Most often, it refers to a generalized disturbance or stirring up of the organism with characteristic conscious, behavioral, and physiological concomitants. Max, 1976. It is a subjective internal state that has biological, cognitive, and social components. Bonney and Rosso, 1998. The expression of emotions is affected by physiological arousal, motivation, experience, cognitive interpretation of what is happening, and the social context. Physiological changes always accompany emotion, and some physiologists claimed that each emotion has a unique associated pattern. For instance, the heart rate may increase or decrease, reception may speed up or slow down, pupils of the eyes may dilate or constrict, muscles may contract or relax, and other physiological changes may occur depending on the emotion involved. Emotional feelings differ from one individual to another. This is based on how an individual thinks about his or her situation. The same situation can trigger different emotional reactions from different people, depending on how the person evaluates or appraises it. Emotion also has social components, and as such, it is affected by the presence of other people. Dimensions of emotions. The dimensions along which emotions can be most meaningfully ordered seem to be affective tone, that is, pleasant or unpleasant, intensity, temporal duration, and complexity. Affective tone. The pleasant or unpleasant character of an emotion may well be its most important characteristics. Much of the mediating power of emotion is mediated by means of the apparent attractiveness of the positive emotion or the apparent repulsion of the negative emotion. The affective tone of an emotion refers directly to its introspective or conscious pleasant or unpleasant quality. Therefore, the organism may be attracted to pleasant quality and repelled by unpleasant ones. Intensity. The intensity of emotion can be manifested in any of the following 3 component processes: consciousness, behavior, or physiological reactions. For instance, the seemingly inert man who has just been insulted by his boss may be sitting inside, both consciously and physiologically, although giving no overt behavioral indication of strong emotion. On the contrary, the vigorous reacting actually may be very little disturbed, either consciously or psychologically. Temporal duration. Emotional reactions vary widely in their temporal duration. Some are very brief. For instance, a pain reaction may be momentary and have no lasting effect. Most emotional reactions tend to persist over longer times and may have permanent consequences. For example, emotional reactions to the loss of loved ones. Complexity. One of the most striking aspects of emotion is their diversity. In other words, emotions are diverse in nature. Types of emotion. We can classify emotion into different categories by their origins and their object. Max, 1976. Using this criteria, we can isolate two major sources of emotion, namely situation and organism, mainly human, and then make further subdivision according to objects of the emotion within each of these categories, as in figure 9.1 below. Classification of types of emotion according to origin and object. Emotion, origin, object. Pleasure, pain, in the same category, and under origin you have situational and sensory. Under object you have approach stimulus, withdrawal from stimulus. Emotions. And emotions like when you have joy, sorrow, fear, or anger, the origin most of the time is cognitive, and the object, approach, conscience, approach, quiescence, flight, that's escape, or fight, that's an attack. Under emotions, you have pride, shame, guilt, or you say remorse. And origin could be social, and that is self-referral. Under objects, you have one on self. Now, emotions, love, hate. Origin could be interpersonal, and objects could be significant or others. Source of this is a Max MH 1976, Introduction to Psychology. Problems, Procedures and Principles, New York Macmillan Publishing Co. Incorporation. Situational emotions. These are emotions aroused by situations. They are initiated by the immediate stimulus situation by means of direct sensory effects and those related to the more longer term motivational or the characteristics of the situation. Under the categories are A, the primary emotion like happiness, sorrow, fear, and anger, and B, evaluative emotions. Primary emotions. This include happiness. This is a pleasant or positive emotion. It is also called emotion of joy, delight, ecstasy, or cheerfulness. A happy response is the producer of satisfaction of a motive. The stronger or deeper the motive and the more adequate the consummation, the greater the happiness. Sorrow. This is a negative or unpleasant emotion. It is a kind of emotion which results from the loss of a goal, desired object, or loss of loved ones, and so on. In extreme form, sorrow turns into severe grief and depression. It is characterized by reduced level of overt activity and a tendency to dwell upon the loss. Fear. It is a negative or unpleasant emotion. It is a reaction to real or fancied danger or threat. Basic to fear is the realization that one is not able to ward off the danger that threatens. Anxiety and anger. These are negative or unpleasant emotions. Anger usually results from the blockage of some goal-directed activity, either real or fenced. On the other hand, anxiety arises from when the push to a goal is unclear, difficult, or threatened. Bernie and Russell, 1998. All frustrating situations produce anger, anxiety, or fear. A wife may become too anxious or angry with her husband, who refuses to take proper care of her and her children. Like other primary emotions, anger shows an enormous variation in intensity, ranging from the mildest expiration to the most violent rage. Evaluative emotions. These are other emotional reactions to situations that seem to be sufficiently different from either the sensory or primary emotions. They involve evaluation of appreciation of situations. They are relatively mild emotional responses. They include the following: aesthetic reactions to artistic performance or production, responses to humor in which the cognitive element is more important, awe of the wonders of nature or man, and religious emotions of various sorts. Social emotions. These are emotions related to people. They can be divided into two major classes: those of self-referral and those involving reactions to others. A. Self-appraisal emotions. Under this category are emotions of self-esteem, pride, shame, guilt, and remorse. Esteem. This is a kind of emotion by which the ego of individual becomes boosted. The esteem in which one holds himself is a function of many social and personal variables. Guilt. This is more specific emotional reaction to a particular violation of a code of ethics or moral behavior. For example, a promiscuous wife may feel guilt for contracting gonorrhea or HIV or AIDS infection outside her home. Remorse. This may be regarded as an explicit and extended variety of guilt feeling. Interpersonal emotions. These are social emotions that involve reacting to other people. This includes emotions of love and hate. Love. This is a more or less intense emotional attachment for other individuals, that is, romantic love, parental love, etc. Hate. It is a more or less intense feeling of emotional repulsion towards other individuals. For example, fear, anger, etc. Both love and hate tend to be persistent or ordering emotional conditions. Also, both show characteristically periodic increment or decrement based on the presence and absence of target individual. In general terms, emotions can be positive, that is pleasant. Emotions such as happiness, joy, delight, cheerfulness, laughter, etc. Or negative, unpleasant emotions like anxiety, fear, worry, guilt, shame, remorse, anger, depression, sadness, and so on. Consequences of emotional arousal. Emotional arousal has both positive and negative effects, which may be short or long-term effects, such as effects as briefly highlighted below. 1. Emotional arousal is often destructive of performance. 2. It can be an important factor in organizing behavior and in the mobilization of resources brought to bear on the problem. 3. A moderate degree of emotional arousal enhances efficiency of a goal. And 4. The long-term effects of emotional arousal are more serious in terms of personality development and deterioration. Theories of emotion. The James Lange theory. James Lange theory of emotion, named after William James and Carl Lange, postulates that when an individual encounters a ferocious animal like a bear in the wood, two things are likely to happen. A. The individual will run to escape, and B. The individual feels fear, that is, becomes afraid. That is, the individual concerned will first run, then realize he or she is afraid. Therefore, seeing that bear leads to several physiological changes, such as increased blood pressure, pounding heart, faster breathing, and tensing of the muscles, as well as the response of running to escape from the bear. When we perceive these changes after they occur, we can interpret them as emotion, that is, fear. In other words, emotion is the feeling of bodily changes. Reisensen et al., 1995. The theory states further that we feel different emotions because the body produces different physiological changes and responses for each emotion that is provoking stimulus. For example, emotion of fear produces bodily changes different from those produced by emotion of anger or depression. The theory is illustrated in the figure below. James Lange theory of emotion. Stimulus, that is, sight of bear. Psychological arousal and response, that is, run. Emotional response, that is, the fear. Source: Bonney, L.E., and Russell, N.F., 1998. Psychology, Behavior in Context, New York, W.W. Knott and Company, Incorporations. The Cannon-Bird theory. The theory was a prominent alternative to James Lange theory. Thus, where James Lange theory states, we see the bear, our body physiology changes, and then we experience fear. The Cannon-Bird theory states that we see the bear, we simultaneously experience fear, and our body physiology changes in reaction to our perception. This is a common sense argument. According to Cannon and Bird, when an emotional stimulation is presented, a subcortical structure in the brain, thalamus, is immediately stimulated through the hypothalamus and limbic system, which are the seats of emotions. The subcortical structure discharges electrical impulses upward into the brain, activating the cerebral cortex, and downward throughout the body, activating the autonomous nervous system. The cerebral cortex produces the emotional experience or feelings, and the autonomic nervous system prepares the person for fight or flight. Finally, there is an overreaction, the behavioral components of emotion, which comes after both the biological and experimental, that's consciousness aspect. Cannon-Bird theory of emotion. The figure for it: stimulus, that is sight of bear, activation of thalamus, then you have physiological arousal, and also cortical activation and emotional experience, which is fear. Then all results to response, which is run. Source: Boney, Ellie and Russell, NF 1998. Psychology, Behavior in Context, New York W.W. Norton and Company Incorporations. The two-factor theory of emotion. Emotional experience can be divided into two parts, namely physiological arousal and cognitive appraisal. Weiner, 1986. Arousal is the energizing aspect of emotion. Appraisal refers to recognizing, categorizing, and evaluating a situation. Therefore, the theory holds that emotional experience is a combination of your arousal and your understanding of the situation. Now, whether it is aroused or understanding that come first has been a subject of debate. In reality, it doesn't matter which comes first. Most of the time, arousal and appraisal are constantly changing and interacting. Sometimes, the change in arousal precedes appraisal, or sometimes it follows it. Arousal signals that something is happening, and if aroused, we seek an explanation for it. Depending on circumstances, we label that arousal as the emotion that seems most appropriate depending on the situation. This is called the two-factor theory of emotion. This was proposed by Carter and Singer in 1962. The theory is illustrated in the figure 9.4 below. Carter and Singer's two-factor theory of emotion. Stimulus, that's sight of bear, moves to cognitive appraisal, that is, bear is dangerous, and then emotional experience, which is fear. Source: Barney, Early, and Russell, NF 1998. Psychology, Behavior in Context, New York W.W. Newton and Company Incorporations. Sajong's theory of emotion. This theory was proposed by Robert Sajong in 1980. He doubts that cognitive appraisal, as described by Carter and Singer, is the usual cause of emotional feeling. He argues that in most circumstances, the emotional feeling and the behavioral reaction occur too rapidly to be caused by prior cognitive appraisal. For instance, if you come across a bear in the woods suddenly, you do not spend a lot of time thinking before you feel scared and start running. Sargent suggests instead that cognitive appraisal and emotional experience are relatively independent of each other. He states that they proceed in parallel. He states that they proceed in parallel and that either can be the first to react to a stimulus. The theory is illustrated in the figure below. Figure 9.5. Sargent's theory of emotion. Stimulus, that is sight of bear, which moves to physical arousal and response, that is run. Then emotional experience, that is fear, and cognitive appraisal, that is bear is dangerous. Source: Burney, Ellie, and Russell, NF, 1998. Psychology, Behavior in Context, New York, W. W. Nielsen and Company Incorporations. Implications of emotional theory. Emotions has two important components, namely general arousal and cognitive appraisal. The four theories of emotion discussed above focus their attention on these two components, and this make them to have useful implication not only for the individuals but for social workers and other professionals that render health services to their parents or clients. Their implications are the following. 1. Emotional theory can be used by social workers and other caregivers to control human emotional level. First, they can teach people with emotional problems to modify their general arousal level. Usually, people in need of emotional control are overtly aroused. Therefore, they might be taught how to relax using techniques such as meditation or monitoring breathing or controlling muscle tension by trying to remain relaxed and calm. 2. Emotional theory can be applied by the social worker and other caregivers to control and modify cognitive appraisal. In other words, the theory can be used by these workers to help their clients and patients who have negative feelings or thinking about themselves or their situation to change these feelings or thinking to positive ones. The theory can be used to help individuals with negative feelings or thoughts to create a different cognitive appraisal. Learning to make different cognitive appraisal of the same situation can produce greater control over your emotion. 3. Emotional theory serves as a base for treating people with emotional or psychological problems. For instance, it is a basis for a therapy called rational emotive therapy, in which clients are helped to overcome their negative feelings, thoughts, and other forms of cognitive distortions. Study session summary. In this study session, we discussed emotion as a psychological concept having conscious, behavioral, and psychological facets. It is a subjective feeling or experience of every individual which has affective tone, intensity, temporal duration, and complexity. Emotion is categorized into situational and social emotions. Situational emotions include primary emotions of happiness, anger, sorrow, fear, and evaluative emotion. And social emotions include emotion of esteem, guilt, remorse, as well as interpersonal emotions of love and hate. That ends study session 9. Thanks